My heart seemed to stop as Scott's words fell casually across his desk. Mark, after 15 years, we're eliminating your position effective immediately. Please clear your desk by the end of the day. I stared at him blankly, the reality not quite setting in. At 50 years old, I'd expected loyalty to mean something, but apparently it meant nothing. Optima Tech in Seattle had been my second home, a place where I'd spent late nights, weekends, and holidays, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Now, with a cold, impersonal sentence, it was over. No reason given, no explanation, just dismissal with a forced politeness that felt far crueler than open hostility. I had often imagined leaving Optima perhaps upon retirement, with a small celebration, friendly faces smiling warmly, recounting stories from our years together. Instead, I got silence, a quiet, dismissive wave from Scott Evans, a young MBA graduate who had become my superior 5 years ago. He didn't understand our systems, didn't care to learn, and now it appeared he had deemed me unnecessary. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak, feeling betrayed more deeply than I had thought possible. I stood quietly, turned, and walked out of his glass-walled office, acutely aware of eyes following my every step. My legs felt heavy as though I was walking underwater. The distance from Scott's office to my desk seemed endless. At my desk, I began methodically collecting my personal items. A family picture, my son's handmade ceramic coffee mug he'd proudly given me on Father's Day, a small succulent that had miraculously survived under the harsh fluorescent lighting for years. Each object reminded me of the countless hours spent here. The family milestones missed the quiet pride I'd taken in my unseen but essential role. I felt rather than saw the younger team members casting nervous glances in my direction, quickly turning away whenever I looked up. I'd personally mentored many of them patiently, teaching the complexities of our aging infrastructure and how to navigate legacy software. They were smart kids, promising but inexperienced, entirely unaware of the detailed system architecture I'd maintained single-handedly. Beth from marketing cautiously approached my desk. Her eyes darted anxiously towards Scott's office before whispering urgently, "Mark, what's happening? This is absurd. Everyone knows how vital you are." I forced a small, tired smile. "Companies change directions, Beth. Apparently, I'm not part of the new path." Her eyes flashed anger, but I shook my head gently, signaling her to stop. "It's all right," I lied quietly, knowing she understood the truth behind my forced composure. She stepped back hesitantly, her frustration evident but restrained. When I finally stood to leave, Scott emerged from his office doorway, arms folded, silently watching. No farewell, no handshake, just a silent sentinel ensuring my departure. That was perhaps the worst indignity, being treated as if my years of dedication amounted to nothing more than a security risk. I glanced around one last time, absorbing the details I'd grown to overlook: the beige cubicle partitions, faded motivational posters, and the quiet hum of computers I had meticulously maintained. I surrendered my access card at reception, the plastic card feeling heavier in my hand than it ever had before. As I stepped into the gray Seattle drizzle, I turned to look back at the tall building that had swallowed so much of my life. The place I'd proudly helped grow from a modest office to a major tech presence in the region. I knew then that no matter how quietly I'd left, they would soon realize exactly what they had lost. Quietly devastated, I walked slowly to my car, the shock giving way to a quiet resolve. They had underestimated me. Soon they'd understand the full weight of their mistake. For now, though, the silence of my dismissal lingered, painfully unfair and undeniably unjust. As I sat at my desk packing my belongings, a heavy silence settled over the office. My movements felt mechanical, disconnected, as if someone else controlled my hands. Each small item I placed into the cardboard box, a framed picture of my family. My son's mug, the succulent now looking oddly forlorn, felt like a personal defeat. Around me, younger colleagues whom I'd mentored kept their heads down, their eyes fixed rigidly on their screens. Occasionally, their gazes would flicker towards me, then quickly away, a mix of embarrassment, confusion, and sympathy written plainly on their faces. I couldn't blame them for their silence. I knew how intimidating Scott could be, especially after witnessing my abrupt dismissal. Still, it stung deeply. These were bright kids, most of them fresh out of college. I'd spent countless hours patiently guiding them, teaching them everything about Optima Tech's infrastructure, the hidden shortcuts, undocumented workarounds, and the complex custom systems I'd built over the years. Yet none dared approach or say goodbye, held captive by an unspoken fear of association. In this muted moment of departure, I recalled my first day at Optima Tech, the excitement I felt walking into what was then a small, ambitious startup. Over 15 years, I'd watched it expand from modest rented offices to an imposing corporate presence in Seattle's bustling downtown. I'd been instrumental in navigating multiple technological transition shifts from legacy servers to cloud-based infrastructure, from rudimentary networks to sophisticated security protocols. And now, after all my dedication here, I was quietly dismissed without explanation. Suddenly, Beth approached hesitantly, her face drawn and concerned. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she leaned toward me. "Mark, you deserved better than this. It's not right everyone knows it." I paused, momentarily grateful for her courage. "Thanks, Beth. I'll be okay," I murmured, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. She hesitated, visibly struggling with her emotions. "This place won't be the same without you," she finally said softly, retreating back to her desk before drawing unwanted attention. Finally, when my desk was empty and the box was full, I took one last look at my workstation, my home away from home for so many years. Every inch of the cubicle held memories, late nights, spent troubleshooting crises, early mornings, preparing system updates, and quiet afternoons mentoring new hires. Now it felt strangely foreign, like a place I'd never belonged. Carrying the box, I walked slowly toward the elevator. Scott stood at his doorway, watching silently, arms folded across his chest. Face expressionless. No final acknowledgement, no handshake, not even a farewell. Just a silent, clinical observation of my exit, as if I were nothing more than a security risk to be managed. I nodded slightly in his direction, a small, bitter acknowledgement of defeat, before turning my back and stepping into the elevator. The metal doors closed, leaving me alone with the soft hum and a sense of profound isolation. Downstairs, the receptionist awkwardly accepted my security badge, avoiding my gaze. "Take care, Mark," she murmured softly. "You too," I replied mechanically, feeling hollow inside. Outside, Seattle's characteristic drizzle seemed fitting, a gray reflection of my inner turmoil. I placed my box gently in the trunk of my car, then sank into the driver's seat, sitting silently for a long moment. Looking back at the Optima Tech building, I felt a quiet resolve begin to rise within me. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be, not after everything I'd sacrificed. I'd leave quietly today, but they'd soon realize their mistake. Loyalty might mean nothing to them, but competence and integrity would ultimately prevail. I started the engine, gripping the steering wheel, firmly determined to regain control. This quiet departure was not the closure they intended. It was just the beginning. Sitting in my home office the following morning felt surreal. The usual routine, my morning coffee, checking system logs, verifying backups, now seemed meaningless. Instead of logging into Optima Tech's network, I stared at my laptop's blank screen, haunted by unanswered questions. The abruptness of my termination gnawed at me. Why had Scott fired me without explanation? What was behind the secrecy and sudden urgency? The longer I reflected, the clearer it became that something had shifted months ago. Gradual yet noticeable changes had begun to erode my position, leaving me blind until now. I remembered when Scott Evans first arrived 5 years earlier, fresh out of business school, eager to implement sweeping efficiencies. From the start, his interactions were clinical, treating our department more as budgetary line items rather than people with specialized skills. Initially, I had chalked it up to youthful arrogance, hoping he'd eventually appreciate the complexity of what we did. Over time, however, I noticed subtle changes: being sidelined during critical project meetings, excluded from decision-making, my administrative access quietly limited. Initially, these restrictions were so incremental, I barely registered their significance. Now, in hindsight, they revealed a calculated, deliberate sidelining. I opened my laptop, suddenly motivated. Although my company-issued credentials had supposedly been revoked, I had long ago created alternative secure pathways for emergency troubleshooting backdoors only someone intimately familiar with the system could access. Scott's arrogance had blinded him to my meticulous documentation and my carefully concealed redundancies. Logging in through my private channels, I navigated to the administrative control panel. As expected, my official account showed access restricted, a blunt reminder of my status as persona non grata. but my unofficial pathway remained wide open. I began methodically reviewing activity logs from recent months, hunting for clues. Scott's fingerprints were everywhere, quietly tightening administrative privileges, restricting access points, shifting responsibilities to junior staff whom I had personally trained. Yet beneath these strategic shifts lay something else, something more disturbing. Scrolling through email archives, I found a message thread dating 6 months back, a conversation I had never been privy to. Scott had proposed restructuring the IT department, focusing on cost-cutting and outsourcing crucial functions. My role was conspicuously absent from the proposed organizational chart. This plan had clearly been set in motion long before my dismissal. Another thread caught my attention. Scott had corresponded regularly with an external consultant named Lucas Bennett from Horizon Consulting, a company I'd never encountered during my tenure. Digging further, I discovered Scott and Michael Carter, OptimaTech's CFO, frequently authorized payments to this unfamiliar entity. These emails lacked details of deliverables or specific services rendered. Instead, vague descriptions and inflated invoices dominated their exchanges. Suspicion tightened my chest. It became painfully clear I'd been deliberately removed before these transactions drew internal attention. Horizon Consulting appeared to be more than just another vendor. It was Scott and Michael's secret, a financial sinkhole I was not supposed to discover. I felt a mixture of betrayal and anger, realizing how comprehensively Scott had undermined my position and reputation. He hadn't just removed me to streamline the company, he'd eliminated a threat to their financial deception. Each quiet demotion of my administrative privileges had been strategically calculated to blind me to their illicit activities. I leaned back, processing this betrayal. My phone buzzed, suddenly breaking my concentration. It was a text from Chris, a junior engineer I'd mentored for the past 2 years. "Mark, everyone's asking what happened. Scott's telling everyone you retired early, but we know it's not true. Are you okay?" I paused, then replied briefly, "I'm okay, Chris. Keep your head down. Just focus on your work. Be careful." Chris responded immediately, "Understood. If you need anything, let me know." I set down my phone, appreciating his loyalty, but unwilling to drag him into this storm prematurely. Scott had underestimated me by dismissing my value and overlooking my knowledge. Every system, every log, every hidden access point I had built, secured them and maintained them meticulously. He had no idea how deeply I understood the inner workings of OptimaTech, both technological and human. I resolved then to use my expertise carefully, methodically, and patiently. Scott and Michael believed they'd secured their positions by removing me, but they'd inadvertently exposed their vulnerabilities. Their betrayal had been strategic, yes, but it had also been profoundly careless. Determined to reclaim justice, I logged out, carefully erasing my digital tracks as I exited. The quiet man they'd dismissed without a second thought was about to become their worst nightmare. The following days felt endless as I adjusted to life without OptimaTech. Still, rather than mourning my abrupt exit, I found myself becoming increasingly restless, drawn irresistibly back to my private investigation. A deep intuition told me something significantly bigger was lurking beneath the surface of Scott's carefully orchestrated dismissal. Late one evening, as rain tapped rhythmically against my window, I sat at my home office desk laptop, open logging again into the company's internal system through the obscure pathways I'd established years ago. My earlier discovery of suspicious email exchanges and vague invoices to Horizon Consulting had opened a floodgate of suspicion that needed urgent resolution. I navigated directly into Optima's financial software, a secure encrypted application designed to track and manage vendor transactions. Given my thorough understanding of the system's back-end bypassing, typical access controls was straightforward, though still risky. My heart quickened slightly at the intrusion, despite knowing the system's weaknesses intimately. I filtered transaction records from the last 2 years, scanning carefully for irregularities. Soon a clear, troubling pattern emerged. Over the past 16 months, regular payments had been authorized to Horizon Consulting, substantial sums delivered monthly, without any clear documentation of services rendered. Each payment was discreetly approved by CFO Michael Carter and co-signed digitally by Scott Evans. The amounts varied cleverly, avoiding uniformity to prevent automated flagging, but collectively they totaled approximately $1.5 million. I sat back heavily, staring at the numbers glowing starkly on the screen. Scott and Michael had carefully orchestrated this arrangement, masking it behind vague descriptions such as strategic consulting, and infrastructure review. Yet I'd never once encountered Horizon Consulting in operational or project meetings unheard of for such significant expenditures. Driven by curiosity and growing indignation, I shifted my attention outward researching Horizon Consulting. My pulse quickened as I found their registered address nothing more than a nondescript mailbox rental in an anonymous strip mall on the outskirts of Tacoma, a typical tactic employed by shell companies to mask true ownership. Digging further, I accessed public business registration databases, cross-referencing Horizon's filings with names connected to Optima Tech's executives. It wasn't long before a familiar name surfaced: Lucas Bennett, listed owner and operator of Horizon Consulting. A quick social media search revealed Lucas was none other than Michael Carter's brother-in-law. The connection was unmistakably intentional, familial ties conveniently hidden beneath layers of corporate anonymity. My stomach twisted in anger and disbelief. The betrayal went far beyond my personal humiliation. Scott and Michael were actively defrauding Optima Tech, siphoning funds through inflated invoices. They'd carefully planned their scheme, counting on internal oversight weaknesses and their senior positions to ensure compliance without suspicion. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, tempted to immediately expose their deceit, but I knew better. Rash action now would only provide them an opportunity to cover their tracks and discredit me as a disgruntled former employee. No patience and careful documentation would be my allies. I meticulously saved the evidence, taking screenshots, compiling financial statements, email correspondence, and transaction logs. Each file was methodically encrypted and stored securely offline, copied onto multiple drives strategically placed in various locations for redundancy. After years of managing critical data, security had become second nature. Finally, I logged off and sat silently, my home office illuminated softly by the dim glow of a single desk lamp. The clock on my wall ticked quietly, marking the seconds as my thoughts raced. Scott and Michael likely believed their clever scheme was foolproof, that eliminating me had secured their safety. Yet they'd overlooked a fundamental truth: the systems they exploited were those I had personally designed, monitored, and protected for more than a decade. Their blind arrogance had left traces of their wrongdoing all over the digital landscape, traces that only I knew how to find. A faint sense of satisfaction began replacing my earlier bitterness. My quiet departure had given them false confidence, blinding them to my capabilities. Now, sitting here surrounded by undeniable proof, my resolve solidified. They'd chosen their path built on deception and betrayal. Now it was time for me to carefully guide them to its inevitable conclusion. I stood stretching my tense shoulders, knowing the next phase would require careful planning and patience. The quiet systems administrator they dismissed without ceremony was about to methodically dismantle their carefully constructed facade piece by piece until nothing remained hidden. Over the next several days, my home office transformed from a quiet refuge into a makeshift investigative hub. My desk, once a place for casual browsing and weekend projects, was now cluttered with printouts, flash drives, and hastily scribbled notes. My sleep was sporadic, driven by the relentless urgency to unravel the full depth of Optima Tech's internal corruption. Each new discovery had increased the weight of betrayal, yet simultaneously strengthened my resolve. Scott Evans and Michael Carter had quietly embezzled nearly $1.5 million through their cleverly disguised transactions with Horizon Consulting. However, instinct warned me this was only the tip of the iceberg. Men who could betray a loyal employee without hesitation were unlikely to stop at a single scheme. Late one evening, fueled by coffee and determination, I delved deeper into Optima Tech's archived financial records. Armed with my unique administrative insights and access credentials Scott arrogantly assumed were fully revoked, I methodically traced every significant financial movement over the past 3 years. Patterns emerged clearly hidden beneath layers of routine activity, waiting only for someone meticulous enough to notice. My instincts were confirmed when another obscure vendor surfaced repeatedly: North Shore Enterprises. Like Horizon, this company had received substantial irregular payments, masked as consulting and specialized advisory services. Cross-checking addresses led predictably to another mailbox rental service, this one in Everett, reinforcing the pattern of shell company activity. Public records indicated North Shore Enterprises had been quietly established 3 years earlier. Its listed principal was Angela Carter, Michael Carter's wife. A cold chill settled over me as the implications became clear. Michael hadn't just involved his brother-in-law Lucas. He'd brought his own wife into the fraudulent enterprise, ensuring secrecy through family ties. The payments to North Shore Enterprises totaled an astonishing $3.9 million, systematically siphoned off under Scott's direct oversight. Scott had not only approved these inflated expenses, but also actively facilitated their concealment, ensuring minimal scrutiny through carefully orchestrated budget adjustments and falsified performance reports. He had done everything in his power to prevent internal alarms from sounding, ensuring Optima's financial auditors saw nothing unusual. Now, sitting at my cluttered desk, the depth of betrayal became starkly apparent. My loyalty, integrity, and dedication qualities I'd assumed universally respected had been ruthlessly exploited and discarded. The very systems I had meticulously constructed and safeguarded were manipulated to facilitate widespread fraud. Scott and Michael had arrogantly gambled that my departure would render me powerless, unaware they'd left behind a detailed, damning digital footprint only I could fully decipher. Each discovery had been carefully documented: transaction dates, amounts, digital signatures, email correspondence, and the familial connections linking the players. Screenshots, financial ledgers, encrypted backups, all safely stored across multiple external drives, securely hidden in several off-site locations. My caution was not paranoia, merely an understanding born from years of cybersecurity training. Ensuring evidence integrity was critical, especially now. My phone buzzed again. Chris had been regularly checking in, clearly sensing the deeper currents running beneath Optima's surface. Mark Scott's acting tense lately, pushing us to finish projects urgently. Strange vibe in the office. Everyone's uneasy. I pondered briefly before replying, "Stay alert, but don't confront anyone. Protect yourself. Things will unfold soon." His brief acknowledgement reassured me he'd be cautious. I had to protect those like Chris, innocent bystanders, caught unknowingly in the middle. My grievance was solely with Scott and Michael, architects of this betrayal, not the dedicated employees I had once guided. Standing briefly to stretch, I paced slowly across my office, absorbing the weight of my findings. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. However, exposing them prematurely risked their escape or destruction of crucial proof. I needed precision, strategic timing, and irrefutable clarity. Late into the night, I meticulously organized the evidence, preparing a comprehensive report detailing each fraudulent transaction. Tables, dates, amounts, names, email communications, all carefully cataloged, cross-referenced, and securely stored. The quiet systems administrator they dismissed had become their judge-jury, and soon enough their executioner. Scott and Michael had underestimated me, assuming my quiet nature equated passivity or ignorance. But my silence had always concealed vigilance, careful observation, and unwavering integrity. Now their arrogance would be their downfall, their hubris exposed by the meticulous evidence trail I had painstakingly uncovered. Satisfied that my initial investigation was complete and thorough, I closed my laptop, exhaustion finally creeping into my bones. Tomorrow would bring strategic planning, but tonight I rested secure in the knowledge that justice was patiently waiting, ready to strike precisely when I chose. With the depth of Optima Tech's internal fraud clearly laid out before me, it became essential to shift from discovery to strategy. Recklessly rushing into exposure would risk sabotaging the entire operation, allowing Scott and Michael precious time to cover their tracks or discredit me as merely a disgruntled former employee. I knew their arrogance intimately. Both men believed their scheme impenetrable, but arrogance breeds complacency, and complacency leaves gaps for careful observers like me to exploit. My strategy would hinge on meticulous documentation, calculated timing, and absolute discretion. First, I ensured every piece of evidence was triple-checked and irrefutably clear. Financial transactions, email exchanges, vendor registrations, family relationships, everything meticulously cataloged, cross-referenced, and secured. Each digital record was encrypted, duplicated across multiple secure drives, and safely stored in various undisclosed locations. The risk was substantial. Any oversight now could unravel everything. Next, I carefully reviewed Optima Tech's internal policies and legal structures, understanding precisely how to leverage my findings effectively. Despite the emotional turmoil Scott and Michael had caused me, I remained coldly objective, knowing that emotion was the enemy of clarity. Precision would be my greatest weapon. An essential element in my planning was determining who to inform first. Revealing the fraud directly to Scott or Michael prematurely would give them ample opportunity to destroy critical records or fabricate plausible denials. Conversely, taking evidence straight to law enforcement without internal awareness could prompt chaotic reactions, potentially obscuring the full extent of the scheme. The ideal first step became clear: an anonymous internal tip directed carefully to Scott, ambiguous enough to sow uncertainty, yet credible enough to force immediate revealing actions. I still retained quiet access to an internal email account, created years earlier for security testing purposes, one carefully overlooked by Scott in his sweeping access revocations. With careful wording, I composed an anonymous email outlining vague concerns about financial irregularities involving a vendor relationship that merits urgent review, intentionally omitting Horizon Consulting's identity or specifics about North Shore Enterprises. The ambiguity was intentional, leaving Scott scrambling without clear direction, creating panic rather than clarity. Before sending the email, I meticulously planned my subsequent actions, anticipating Scott's likely responses: initial dismissal, growing anxiety, frantic efforts at internal cover-up, followed by direct confrontation or threats. I prepared contingency responses, readying myself emotionally and logistically for each possible scenario. Additionally, recognizing potential legal threats from Optima's HR department, I verified that I'd never signed any confidentiality or severance agreements upon my abrupt departure. This oversight by Scott's management would prove crucial if confronted legally. If threats emerged as I anticipated, my preparedness would ensure composure and resilience. To protect those still within the company, particularly Chris and the other junior employees, I also crafted careful guidelines to subtly warn them without direct involvement. They had no reason to suffer consequences from actions driven solely by the greed of their superiors. My goal was to minimize collateral damage while methodically dismantling Scott and Michael's fraudulent scheme. Finally, to ensure absolute security, I reviewed and updated my personal digital security protocols at home. Passwords, firewalls, VPNs, encrypted channels, each meticulously refreshed and hardened. I knew Scott's desperation could lead to extreme measures if my involvement became apparent, so absolute discretion and robust security were paramount. I stood stretching slowly, feeling a cold, deliberate satisfaction growing within me. This strategy session had taken hours of intense concentration, but the clarity and thoroughness were comforting. Scott and Michael had underestimated me from the beginning, mistaking quiet diligence for passivity. They had dismissed my abilities and betrayed my loyalty, assuming I would fade silently into obscurity, never understanding my capabilities or dedication to justice. However, their scheme had inadvertently highlighted their vulnerabilities: carelessness born from arrogance. Each unchecked oversight, each administrative shortcut they'd taken, provided me with the precise leverage needed to ensure their downfall. Sitting back in my chair, I felt a quiet but unmistakable shift within me. The pain of betrayal and injustice was evolving into focused determination. My silence, once forced upon me, had now become my greatest weapon, a weapon Scott and Michael could never anticipate nor defend against. As I clicked the send button, dispatching the anonymous email directly into Scott's inbox, I allowed myself a brief cold smile. The first careful domino had just been nudged into motion. Now the real game had begun. The morning after sending the anonymous email, I waited patiently in my home office, eyes fixed on my laptop screen. I knew the message had already reached Scott's inbox. The vague yet concerning mention of financial irregularities was precisely calculated to trigger his panic. He'd quickly suspect someone internal was onto his scheme, but the ambiguity ensured he'd be unsure exactly how much was known or by whom. Precisely at 9:37 a.m., my phone buzzed a text from Chris. Scott called an emergency team meeting first thing. He seems tense, asking lots of strange questions about finance systems. Did something happen? A slight sense of satisfaction warmed my chest. Scott's immediate reaction validated my suspicion. He knew exactly which financial irregularities were at stake. My carefully crafted ambiguity was having its intended effect. I replied carefully to Chris. Stay calm, don't get involved. Just observe. Protect yourself first. Chris quickly texted back a thumbs-up emoji. His caution reassured me. The last thing I wanted was collateral damage affecting innocent colleagues. A few minutes later, another message arrived, this time from an unknown number. My pulse quickened slightly as I read it. Mark, this is Vanessa Lane from HR at Optima Tech. We need to urgently discuss a confidentiality matter. Call me immediately. I sat back, absorbing the implications. Scott had acted exactly as predicted, attempting to silence any internal threats through legal intimidation. I had expected Vanessa's involvement, given her reputation for unwaveringly enforcing company policies, even under ethically dubious circumstances. My termination had been executed so abruptly, they'd neglected to formalize a separation agreement. Vanessa's current message was a calculated bluff. Instead of responding immediately, I carefully documented her text and added it to my growing archive of evidence. Scott and Michael's desperate measures were precisely what I needed: actions that implicitly acknowledged their awareness of internal corruption. Around noon, Vanessa texted again, this message sharper and more direct. Mark failing to respond or cooperate immediately could result in serious legal repercussions. Contact me at once. I smiled coldly at her increasing urgency. Their attempts at intimidation were predictable, and revealing Scott's reaction had escalated faster than anticipated, confirming the magnitude of his anxiety. I waited until mid-afternoon before responding with a simple professional message. Vanessa, I have received your messages. As I have not signed any confidentiality or separation agreements, there appears to be no basis for your concerns. Please clarify exactly what confidentiality matter you are referring to. Her response was swift and clearly frustrated. Mark, regardless of agreement's company policy, clearly dictates confidentiality regarding internal matters. Further communications regarding Optima's operations could result in immediate legal action. I chose not to respond further, satisfied that my point had been made. Vanessa's threats lacked substance. They were designed solely to intimidate, hoping to silence potential whistleblowers. Optima's HR department was floundering precisely as expected. Later that evening, I logged discreetly into Optima's internal email system again, scanning recent communications. Unsurprisingly, a frantic email exchange between Scott and Michael had occurred shortly after my anonymous tip. Their desperation was palpable: discussions of immediate internal audits and frantic verification of vendor payments. Scott's paranoia had clearly infected Michael. Their previous confidence was rapidly eroding. Amid these panicked conversations was a notable lack of awareness regarding the true source of the tip. They speculated openly among junior employees, clearly unaware that I still retained access to the digital shadows of their internal network. Their arrogance had made them careless, overlooking my comprehensive knowledge of Optima's IT infrastructure. Satisfied I'd achieved my immediate goal, I carefully documented their panicked correspondence, archiving it securely. Each new piece of evidence further tightened the noose around them, building an undeniable record of their corruption. As I logged out, I reflected on my next strategic move. Scott and Michael were rattled, vulnerable, and increasingly desperate, making them dangerous but predictable. My actions had triggered their internal chaos without explicitly implicating myself, leaving them blindly searching for threats within their own ranks. They were fighting shadows, entirely unaware that their greatest adversary was calmly watching from outside, meticulously collecting evidence, planning the next move. I stood, stretching my tense muscles, finally feeling a quiet satisfaction that replaced earlier frustrations. Scott and Michael had wielded power, recklessly dismissing loyalty, integrity, and expertise as expendable commodities. Now those very qualities they disregarded would be the instruments of their downfall: quietly effective, methodical, and inevitable. Tomorrow would bring escalation, more pressure, and possibly greater risks. But tonight I rested confidently, knowing my plan was unfolding precisely as intended. Their fear and desperation had revealed everything I needed to see. Optima Tech would soon face the consequences of their choices precisely when I decided to deliver them. The following days brought predictable escalation from Optima Tech. Their initial panic had swiftly turned into strategic attempts to discredit and silence me. It was a battle I'd anticipated and one for which I'd meticulously prepared. Each move they made further validated my suspicions, highlighting their growing desperation as the walls slowly closed in. Early one morning, my phone rang sharply, interrupting a quiet breakfast. The caller ID showed Vanessa Lane from HR. Her voice was professionally stern, layered with tension, as she began without greeting. Mark, I'm calling formally to inform you that your recent communications have breached Optima's confidentiality policies. We are preparing to take immediate legal action unless you cease your current activities. I listened quietly, allowing her words to hang heavily in the air. When I responded, my voice remained calm, deliberately composed. Vanessa, I appreciate your concern, but I've not signed any confidentiality or separation agreement with Optima Tech. As a result, your legal threats are baseless. Please clarify exactly what confidential information you believe I've shared." The long pause stretched between us, her breathing audible. Clearly, Scott and Michael had pressured her heavily, hoping she could intimidate me into silence. "Mark, it's not about agreements, it's standard policy. Discussing company financial matters externally is strictly prohibited." "I understand Optima's policy very clearly," I replied evenly. "However, you haven't provided any specifics about what financial matters I've allegedly discussed externally. Could you please elaborate?" She hesitated again, her discomfort palpable. "Mark, consider this your final warning. Further actions will result in severe legal consequences." "Noted, Vanessa," I answered calmly, maintaining my composure. "If there's nothing else, I appreciate your call." I ended the call gently but firmly, refusing to give her the satisfaction of rattling me. The conversation left me with a bitter taste. Optima Tech's senior management was increasingly cornered and desperate, deploying Vanessa as their enforcer. They hoped fear would silence any threats, yet their legal intimidation tactics were hollow bluffs without genuine backing. I carefully documented the conversation, noting Vanessa's implicit admission of internal panic regarding financial disclosures. Her threats would serve as further proof of Optima's frantic attempts to suppress whistleblowing. Each interaction added credibility to the narrative unfolding before me. Later that morning, Chris texted again, his messages increasingly anxious. "Mark, Scott's interrogating everyone privately now. He's obsessed with finding who tipped him off. Tension's insane here." I replied briefly, determined to shield Chris. "Lay low, avoid confrontation. They'll calm down soon." His acknowledgement was swift, simple, but it spoke volumes about the atmosphere of fear permeating Optima Tech's offices. A knock on my front door startled me mid-afternoon. Cautiously opening it, I found a courier holding an envelope. My pulse quickened slightly as I opened it, revealing an official-looking letter from Optima's external legal counsel. The letter sternly demanded immediate cessation of unauthorized communications and activities detrimental to company reputation. The threats were couched in opaque legal jargon, intentionally intimidating, but lacking specificity. I shook my head quietly, unsurprised yet disappointed by their transparent desperation. Optima Tech's legal threats were predictable last-ditch attempts to silence me without genuine substance. I carefully photographed the letter and added it meticulously to my growing digital archive. As evening settled in, I reflected on my next strategic steps. Scott and Michael had inadvertently revealed their greatest vulnerabilities: fear and desperation. They were struggling to identify their adversary, increasingly paranoid, suspicious of everyone around them. The quiet, invisible pressure I'd exerted was achieving precisely what I'd intended, forcing errors, panic-driven actions, and internal chaos. Nevertheless, I understood the dangers clearly. Desperate men often take extreme measures. Ensuring my own safety and preserving the integrity of evidence was paramount. My digital security measures remained robust and frequently updated, but I also began discreetly documenting my movements, ensuring there were reliable records of my whereabouts at all times. That night, sitting quietly at my desk, I opened my encrypted archives again, reviewing the comprehensive evidence I'd meticulously assembled. Financial records, emails, transactions, and now direct evidence of their threats, all carefully cataloged and redundantly stored. Each new step taken by Optima Tech only strengthened my case. Optima's threats didn't frighten me. Instead, they fueled a renewed determination. Scott and Michael had severely underestimated my resolve and capability, assuming I would crumble beneath their intimidation tactics. But the quiet administrator they thought insignificant had transformed into a careful strategist, fully prepared and unwaveringly committed. I closed my laptop calmly, the room now silent except for the faint hum of my computer fan. Tomorrow would mark another crucial step toward the inevitable exposure and collapse of Scott and Michael's scheme. My response would be calculated, precise, and devastating. They had chosen their path, and now they would inevitably face its consequences. With Optima Tech's threats and intimidation tactics fully exposed, I now stood ready to unveil the full scope of Scott and Michael's fraudulent operations. Their desperate attempts to silence me had only strengthened my resolve and provided additional ammunition. Documented proof of their escalating panic and legal threats designed purely to protect their secret. However, my goal was never mere retaliation. It was thorough exposure and genuine justice. Late into a quiet Saturday evening, undisturbed and methodically focused, I sat at my home desk once more, delving deeper into Optima's archived data. The silence around me seemed almost tangible, amplifying the clarity of my thoughts as I pieced together the deeper layers of their embezzlement scheme. While Horizon Consulting had initially drawn my attention due to its overt suspiciousness, my more recent discovery of North Shore Enterprises had revealed another significant layer involving Michael Carter's wife, Angela. Further digging exposed the broader disturbing truth: Optima Tech's internal corruption extended even deeper and involved carefully orchestrated schemes with multiple shell companies strategically designed to evade suspicion. Scott's careful management of departmental budgets had created cover for inflated, seemingly legitimate payments to these hidden companies. These transactions often mirrored legitimate expenses closely enough to bypass casual scrutiny, but differed significantly upon close examination. They were masterfully disguised, structured so subtle discrepancies appeared routine, easily overlooked by hurried auditors. As I meticulously reviewed older financial archives, another troubling name emerged: Westport Advisory LLC, a company receiving periodic inflated consultancy payments dating back several years. Westport Advisory's registered owner, Sarah Evans Scott's sister. The familial connections were staggering in their audacity. Scott and Michael's arrogance had led them to intertwine their corrupt practices directly within their personal relationships, convinced nobody would notice or dare question their authority. My investigation revealed that Westport Advisory had accumulated nearly $2.8 million over 4 years, ostensibly providing strategic services documented only vaguely within Optima Tech's financial records. Scott had approved every invoice without question, even pressuring junior finance employees to expedite payments, citing urgent business needs. With Westport Advisory's discovery, the total amount siphoned through various familial shell companies, Horizon Consulting, North Shore Enterprises, and Westport Advisory, exceeded $8 million. Each dollar meticulously accounted for in my records, each connection explicitly mapped. My initial disbelief at the audacity of their scheme quickly gave way to a cold, unwavering determination. This corruption wasn't a solitary lapse in judgment. It was systemic, deliberate, and deeply embedded within Optima Tech's senior management structure. Scott and Michael had knowingly exploited their roles, enriched themselves and their families, and betrayed the trust of every employee who worked honestly to build the company's success. My comprehensive documentation included carefully prepared spreadsheets, emails clearly illustrating their deliberate actions, vendor registrations explicitly linking family members, and digital transaction records carefully extracted from secure archives. Everything meticulously cross-referenced, verified, and redundantly secured across multiple physical locations to ensure absolute preservation. Taking a brief break, I stepped outside, breathing deeply in the cool Seattle evening air. Reflecting quietly, I acknowledged the profound personal disappointment this betrayal had caused. Optima Tech had represented stability and purpose for 15 years of my life, years willingly given in dedication and loyalty. Their corruption had not only tarnished the company, but undermined the integrity of everyone associated with it. Returning inside, I knew exactly how I must proceed. Revealing this larger, intricate scheme directly to Optima's executives or HR would only lead to more desperate cover-ups or further intimidation tactics. Instead, my next move required absolute discretion and careful timing. The evidence needed to reach someone beyond reproach, someone impartial yet influential enough to ensure decisive, fair action. Elizabeth Tran, a long-standing and respected member of Optima Tech's board, was the perfect choice. I'd worked closely with Elizabeth several years earlier during an extensive security upgrade. She'd consistently demonstrated integrity, curiosity, and a genuine commitment to transparency, qualities desperately needed now. I prepared a detailed, concise summary, clearly outlining every fraudulent transaction, highlighting connections between Scott Michael and their familial shell companies. Every digital record, every suspicious transaction was carefully compiled onto an encrypted flash drive. In the attached documentation, I explicitly recommended independent forensic auditing to validate my findings conclusively. Contacting Elizabeth discreetly, I proposed a confidential meeting off-site, emphasizing urgency, yet providing minimal detail until face-to-face. Her immediate, thoughtful response reassured me that my trust in her was justified. As I secured the final backup of my evidence, encrypting and locking away the physical copies securely off-site, I felt a quiet, profound certainty. The culmination of weeks of meticulous investigation and patient strategy was finally here. Scott and Michael had chosen their path of deception and greed, dismissing loyalty and integrity as meaningless obstacles. Now the quiet systems administrator they had discarded without thought was prepared to expose every carefully hidden truth. Justice was no longer merely inevitable, it was imminent. The meeting with Elizabeth Tran took place on a cold but clear Monday morning at a quiet cafe nestled in a residential neighborhood just outside downtown Seattle. She arrived early, dressed professionally but discreetly, and her expression held the same sharpness I remembered from our prior work together. As she approached, I stood to greet her, the envelope containing my report clutched tightly in one hand and a flash drive secured in my coat pocket. "Mark," she said quietly, sitting across from me. "It's been a while. When I got your message, I knew it had to be serious." "It is," I replied, sliding the sealed envelope across the table. "Everything in here is verifiable. The digital backup is on this drive," I added, producing the device and placing it beside the envelope. She didn't touch either immediately. Instead, she looked me in the eye. "This about Scott and Michael." I nodded slowly, and others connected to them. "It's larger than a simple misuse of funds. There's systemic embezzlement here. Shell companies, family members, millions." Her brow furrowed. "And you have proof. Every transaction, every signature, every digital breadcrumb. I've been compiling it since the day they forced me out." She finally picked up the flash drive and tucked it into her leather satchel. "You're not trying to get your job back, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm not looking for anything. Just accountability." She nodded slowly. "You came to me because I've seen you read every audit report, ask the uncomfortable questions others avoid. You care about the company, and you'll know what to do with this." She smiled faintly. "Well, that's a rare compliment." Her expression sobered again. "The timing is fortunate. There's a finance committee review this Wednesday. I'll make sure this is on the table before then." "Just make sure it doesn't disappear," I said flatly. "I've taken precautions. If anything happens to me, this data reaches 3 outside agencies and 2 media outlets." She raised an eyebrow. "You think they'd go that far?" "I don't think I said, I prepare." She regarded me for a long moment, then stood. "I'll be in touch soon, Mark, and thank you for doing the right thing." As she left, I remained seated for several minutes, staring at the empty coffee cup in front of me. The handoff was complete. The information was out of my hands now, in the possession of someone capable of pushing it through the right channels. Still, I had to stay alert. These were people who'd stolen millions and covered it up for years. Exposure would force their hand, and they'd act fast to protect themselves. That afternoon, as if on cue, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. "Mark, this is Brian Carter." His voice was tight controlled. "We need to talk about your concerns. I think you're misunderstanding the situation." I listened in silence, eyebrows raised. "There are internal protocols for raising issues like this. Let's not escalate unnecessarily. Why don't we meet just the two of us? We can work something out." I paused the message and stared blankly at the wall. "Work something out. Translation, name your price, and walk away quietly." My phone buzzed again, this time an email. From Vanessa in HR. Subject urgent. Severance adjustment. "Mark, per internal discussion, we've reevaluated your exit terms. Attached is an updated severance package reflecting a significantly increased offer. Please review and respond at your earliest convenience." I didn't even open the attachment. It didn't matter what the number was. They were trying to buy silence, again. Later that night, I sat down at my laptop and began preparing my final act. If Elizabeth needed more leverage, I would provide it. I logged into the dormant internal email account I'd created years ago for system testing, a ghost account that didn't appear in any active user directories. Using this account, I scheduled a timed email to be delivered to every member of the board at precisely 8 a.m. Wednesday morning, just as their quarterly finance meeting would begin. Subject: before you approve Q4 bonuses, read this. Attached, a full report, my report detailing every dollar, every fake vendor, every family member connection. Not speculation, not bitterness, just proof. As I clicked schedule, I leaned back and exhaled deeply. The die was cast. By Wednesday morning, they would all know. There would be no more secrets. Let them scramble, let them panic. Let them understand what it feels like to be blindsided by something they didn't see coming, because that's exactly what they did to me. Wednesday dawned calm and bright, the kind of day that felt undeservedly peaceful. I sat on my porch sipping coffee, watching early joggers, Pass and delivery vans rumbled down the block, unaware of the storm I just unleashed. At exactly 800 a.m., my scheduled email landed in the inboxes of every Optima Tech board member. It was direct, professional, irrefutable. By 8:03, the first text arrived from an unknown number. "Mr. Harris, please call back immediately. This is urgent. A. Jacobson, board secretary." I let it go unanswered. By 8:17, 4 more calls came through. Board members' assistants scrambling to verify the contents of the bomb I just dropped. I ignored them all. The truth was now in the open, and I had no intention of allowing anyone to soften or spin it before the full board reviewed the facts. At 9:06, Chris sent a message that froze me mid-sip. "Mark, police are in the building." Carter and Evans both pulled into separate rooms. Phillips looks like he's about to vomit. What is happening? I smiled grimly, setting my mug down. The system was responding as it should. Law enforcement had clearly been contacted by the board, likely after someone on the finance committee opened the report and realized the magnitude of what they were facing. Nearly $8 million stolen, concealed through shell companies tied to executives' family members, with email records, approvals, and payment trails all presented in a neat, inarguable package. At 9:32, I finally answered a call. It was Patricia Graves, General Counsel for Optima Tech. Her tone was clipped professional. "Mr. Harris, we need you to come in immediately to discuss the information you provided." "I'm available by phone," I said. "This really requires an in-person—" "No, it doesn't," I interrupted. "Everything I have is in that report. Everything else is backed up and stored securely in multiple locations. If anything happens to me or my family, additional copies go to the SEC, IRS, and 3 newsrooms. Just so we're clear." Silence. "Finally," she said, "the board is taking this extremely seriously. Several executives have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. They'd appreciate your continued cooperation." "I've already cooperated fully," I said. "My part is done." She ended the call shortly after, her voice tight. I turned my phone face down and drove an hour out of the city to a small diner near the coast. No reason to be easily found today. Over lunch, I refreshed the local news feed. It didn't take long for a headline to pop up on a regional business site. "Optima Tech executives under investigation for financial irregularities." No names listed yet, but that would change. At 2:14 p.m., Elizabeth called. I answered immediately. "It's a bloodbath," she said without preamble. Carter confessed when we confronted him, trying to shift the blame to Scott. Scott's denying everything. Phillips says he was just a consultant and had no idea what was happening. And the board wants information. "We've suspended all 3. Forensic accountants are going through everything. Early estimates say at least $8.6 million diverted, maybe more." I nodded silently. "The board wants to talk to you," she continued. "Not about reprimanding you, about bringing you back." I leaned back in the booth. I had anticipated this. Still hearing it out loud felt strange. "Back in what capacity?" "We're creating a new executive role. Chief Security Officer. You'd report directly to the board. Total independence. You'd have the authority to monitor and audit all departments." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want the position, but because it meant returning to the place that had once so casually discarded me. "I'll think about it," I said. That night, I explained everything to my wife. She listened in silence, then asked one question. "What do you want?" It was a good question. Justice had been served. The people who tried to silence and erase me were now facing criminal charges and public humiliation. But going back to the company that threw me out like outdated hardware, that wasn't about justice, that was a choice. "I need time," I said simply. Later that evening, I opened my dormant LinkedIn account and posted a single message. Never burn bridges. Just let them collapse under the weight of their own greed. Within minutes, messages poured in. Former co-workers, ex-colleagues from partner firms, even competitors. Word had spread. The quiet guy from systems had just taken down 3 top executives without raising his voice. By Monday, everyone would know exactly who they had underestimated. Monday morning arrived with a sense of finality. The city skyline shimmered under the cold light of winter sun as I stood outside Optima Tech's headquarters for the first time in weeks. This time I wasn't escorted out. This time I walked in under my own terms. The security guard, once indifferent, now greeted me with a respectful nod. "Welcome back, Mr. Harris." He printed a visitor badge without being asked. His tone held something new deference. I stepped into the executive elevator, a place I had never once visited during my 15-year tenure. Now I was expected in the boardroom. The ride was quiet, no chimes, no muzak, just silence and ascending steel. The doors opened to a polished corridor where 10 board members sat around a gleaming table in a glass-walled conference room. Elizabeth Tran stood and motioned me in. At the head of the table sat the interim CEO, formerly the COO. She looked composed but visibly tense. "Mr. Harris," she began, "thank you for coming. The situation you brought to light is unprecedented." I said nothing, simply nodded and took the seat offered to me at the far end of the table. She continued, "The full extent of the fraud appears to be worse than we initially estimated. Our forensic audit team has uncovered nearly $9.2 million in diverted funds." There were hushed murmurs around the room. Elizabeth cleared her throat. "The board has unanimously voted to create a new executive position, Chief Information Security Officer. You would report directly to us, independent from any department head, with full audit authority and unrestricted access." She slid a folder across the table. "This contains the official offer." I opened it. My eyes quickly scanned the contents, salary terms, executive privileges, oversight, access to all financial and operational systems, budget veto authority, everything I had outlined as non-negotiable. All there. "This is unusual," the CEO added, "but so was what happened." I closed the folder gently. "The only reason this fraud existed was because no one was watching," I said. "This position changes that." There was no disagreement, only solemn nods. "You have until noon to decide," Elizabeth said, "but we hope you'll accept." "I have other offers," I said flatly. "I'm here because this is unfinished business." They understood. No further persuasion was necessary. At 11:47, my phone rang. It was Elizabeth. "We've accepted your conditions. Welcome aboard." 6 months later, I sat in a corner office overlooking the Seattle skyline. My title etched neatly on the frosted glass door, Chief Information Security Officer. My team, now led by Chris, who I'd promoted, managed daily operations, while I focused on risk auditing and reconstruction of internal systems. Scott Evans had pled not guilty, still clinging to the narrative of ignorance and miscommunication. He'd retained a high-powered legal team and was waiting for trial. Michael Carter had taken a deal, pleading guilty to 3 counts of corporate fraud. In exchange for cooperation, he'd receive a reduced sentence, but it would still include years behind bars and full forfeiture of assets tied to the shell companies. Jason Phillips had fled the country initially, but U.S. authorities caught up with him in Portugal. He was being extradited. Ironically, it was his consulting firm's inflated invoices that helped him solidify the conspiracy. The company had weathered the storm barely. Thanks to quick intervention and recovered funds, Optima Tech avoided collapse. Reputation tarnished, yes, but slowly repairing. The respect I now commanded in the building wasn't born of title, it came from truth. Everyone knew what had happened. And more importantly, they knew who had uncovered it without violence, ego, or chaos. I walked the halls now, not as a forgotten system guy, but as the man who had quietly saved the company from itself. That day, my wife Andrea met me for lunch. As we walked through the IT floor, conversations hushed briefly, not from fear, but from reverence. She squeezed my hand in the elevator. "Happy?" she asked. I thought for a moment. The raw anger that had fueled my first few weeks had long since burned out. What remained wasn't gloating or bitterness. It was peace, not happiness, but something far more valuable. "I'm good," I said, meaning every word. As we walked toward the restaurant, my phone buzzed. A text from Elizabeth. "Security budget increase approved. Unanimous vote." I smiled to myself. Andrea looked over. "Good news." I slid the phone back into my pocket, just thinking about bridges. "Yeah. Some collapse under their own weight," I said. "Others once repaired are stronger than ever. And I had built this one right this time."